morning, everyone, and welcome to another Digital Jamaica Live. My name is Katie Francis. I'm your host, and today we have two really impressive, exciting people on, my experts, to talk about AI. We're still continuing the conversation about AI. We've been having this conversation for the last 4 episodes, and it's not because it's a trendy thing to talk about, even though if you look across social media, everybody's talking about Chat GPT and Dolly and Mid Journey and all these other cool apps that use AI. But because it's a very important topic to talk about, before we jump into it, I want to shout out my sponsor, G5 Cybersecurity, without whom this show would not be possible, because we all know how difficult it is to create content, much less do a live stream every week. So we are happy for our sponsor, G5 Cybersecurity, protecting businesses and families online and making sure that your digital assets, your online assets, are also very well protected. Good morning, Jody. Welcome to the show. Happy to have you here today. So, guys, as I said before, we've been talking about AI for the last couple of weeks, and when I posted about this particular show, we had some very interesting comments come in over on Instagram. One of the comments says, Jamaica needs to get certain things right before chasing every trend like cryptocurrency and AI. And I want to start out by saying AI is not a trend. This is a discussion that has been happening, I would say, for the last 20 years, if not more. We're just new to the conversation. It doesn't mean the conversation is new. And what often happens when it comes to technology and conversations around technology is that we usually get in on the back end of it or the tail end of it when, a lot of policies have already developed, a lot of the technology has already been developed in a certain way where there are standards that have been created and adapted by industries, governments, etc. And we're now just having the conversation as if it's a new thing. It's not a new thing. It's only now trending on social media because social media. But talking about the cute things is one thing, but talking about the things that will actually have an impact on the economic development of developing countries like Jamaica is a whole other thing. And that's what I actually wanted to tackle, because somebody said since the 1950s. Yeah, I want to tackle it because I want to spread awareness. And this is what Digital Jamaica Live is about, spreading awareness about the different technologies and the direct or indirect impact it can have on our culture, on our economy, etc. So I want to bring your attention to a conversation that was happening at the Carnegie. Did I accidentally delete it? So the Carnegie Council recently, well, not recently, it was in 2021, had a conversation called Ethics, Equality, and AI in the Caribbean. And that conversation included Mr. Cordell Green. And if Cordell Green is the chairman of the Jamaica Broadcast Commission, chairman, I think. And what Cordell Green said kind of struck a nerve with me. He said, the question is not whether AI is beyond the grasp of the Caribbean. It's not even a question as to whether, or it's a dangerous assumption to say that the Caribbean and developed countries are not ready to grasp AI. He did say that. He said that's flatly wrong. Speaking for the Caribbean, he says Caribbean people are always early adopters of technology. AI is already in the Caribbean. We're already using AI technology. And that's another thing too. I don't think a lot of us realize that we're already involved in and using AI technology on an everyday basis. Just on social media alone, we have interacted with AI technology, right? He says, my point is, the question is not whether AI is beyond the grasp of the Caribbean. It simply cannot be. The Caribbean cannot afford to miss this wave of development, but I call for an international framework which is equitable. And he says there's no question in his mind that the existing global trade, human rights, and multilateral framework within which this general purpose technology, AI is considered a general purpose technology because of its potential to impact everything, right? He says the multilateral framework within which this general purpose technology is operating is not in our favor. It's actually stacked against us. It's not in favor of the Caribbean. And so he says we have a lot of deconstruction to do there. So he's saying that these frameworks that have already been developed around these kinds of technologies don't favor us in the Caribbean. Why? I think it's because we tend not to have a seat at the table. Again, because we're users of the technology, not creators of the technology, we tend not to have a seat at the table. So when we're talking about can Jamaica adopt AI technology, can we afford to? What I'm really talking about is what do we need to know and do to be able to use technology in such a way where it benefits us, and can we afford to do that given how small we are in the conversation, given the biases that come with AI, given the immensely disruptive nature of AI, given the fact that as a Caribbean island, we depend heavily on labor. We're a labor-intensive economy, and when automation comes in, and when other uses of AI come in, when it comes to manufacturing and all these other stuff come in, and we lose jobs, then what? So we have to be having this conversation. Also, when we look at the environmental impacts of AI, it takes a lot of energy to build and maintain these systems. And that can add to climate change, and climate change affects who the most? Us in the Caribbean region, right? So how can we protect ourselves from the negative impacts? And we're not saying that it's all negative. AI has immense powers for good. Immense powers for good. No denying that, but we also have to look at the other side of the coin. So joining me to help me put things into perspective is, first up, we have Mr. Adrian Dunkley. He's a tech entrepreneur and an AI engineer with over decades worth of experience launching startups, raising millions of US dollars in capital, and generating 20x multiples for clients. He has utilized his entrepreneurial and science skills in senior executive roles in publicly traded entities and as an academic researcher and lecturer. He has a degree in physics, mathematics, financial engineering, risk management, and is currently completing a PhD in artificial intelligence. I did not even know that was actually a thing, right? He's also the founder of Star Apple AI, and his goal is to improve the Caribbean's quality of life with data science and AI. Welcome to the show, Adrian. It's good to have you. Next up, we have Miss Samantha Sims. Though you would have seen Samantha Sims' face before on this show. Samantha is a digital compliance attorney and strategist. She is the CEO of the Information Collective, a digital compliance consultancy supporting tech executives to start up or scale up their digital products and services. She's committed to developing and maintaining the highest standard of digital ethics, and we're going to talk about ethics. She is a digital anti-racism activist, because that is a thing, and contributes to digital regulation policy development. And she delivers keynote addresses internationally on the intersection between ethics, privacy, and technology. Welcome to the show, Samantha. It's great to have you here as well. So let's just dive right in and let's go to AI and ethics. Why is it important, guys? Why should we be talking about ethics when it comes to technology like artificial intelligence? I'll have the lawyer go first. Samantha, why is the conversation around ethics important? But specifically, why is it important to Caribbean countries like Jamaica?
Well, you hit upon a few points, Katie, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. You hit upon a few points at the very beginning of your intro when we talked about the Caribbean's preparedness for AI. And you mentioned that effectively, when it comes to building AI frameworks, the Caribbean has not necessarily been at the decision-making table, right? Largely been consumers of technology to date. And that's why the Caribbean needs to be really concerned about ethics, because ethic standards are built with the people who built them in mind. And so if we have not been at the table, then the conversation has not been geared towards our unique situation. But there's a point that I wanted to make very early on, and that we need to always think about what does AI really mean, right? It's a newer technology. Yes, it's been around for quite some time, but I wouldn't say that the Caribbean is lagging behind. I think 2023 is the year that AI came to the consumer largely. So in business, we may have been building AI-based systems, but in my experience, if I'm truly honest, a lot of it is just machine learning systems. A lot of them have not migrated or matriculated to actual AI, full-on powers of AI yet, which gives us a lot of advantage. Because if we have not been at the table, if we have not been the developers of those systems in the main, then the data that we have been able to use to build those systems is only going to be augmented and amplified by those systems. And what we end up in is a situation where there is a continual proliferation of information that is maybe not accurate. So when it comes to ethics around AI, what I talk about is garbage in, garbage out. And we, having not been at the table, actually, we haven't been able to choose in the main which data about us goes into these systems and which data outputs we would like to see. And this is why we need to have ethical standards in place which handle the use of AI, the types of data going in, the involvement, to what extent humans are involved in the decision making, the level of profiling that's able to be made about individuals, and how that data is then used to create further outputs, which go on to self-perpetuate and create further and further outputs. And where we don't want to be is that if people see only images, for example, of the Caribbean being beaches, 10 years' time, when the AI systems are really powered up, Caribbean will only be synonymous with beaches. So nobody may think, for example, of the Caribbean as a place for business. I use that example lightly because there are far more far-reaching consequences and unintended impacts of the technology. But just think about that. Garbage in, garbage out. That's why we need ethics.
Understand. Adrian, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely agree with Samantha. I think something very important about AI in general is it's very stupid. It's not actually intelligent at all. There are different ways of applying AI. The most popular now is machine learning, as Samantha said, which relies heavily on data, right? So you can do some really amazing things, but it's very data hungry. The reason it's basically exploded in popularity and usefulness is because it's practical. You're pushing a lot of data and it'll output something. Every single individual on this call, everyone in the world who has internet access or has interacted with a computer in some way has engaged with machine learning in some way, shape, or form, right? Even when you look at ChatGPT, it's still, components of it are still machine learning. So because this thing is stupid and it has so much control and influence over what we're doing on a daily basis, it's important that we consider how it affects us, influence, impact. So that's where the ethics comes in. Because again, it doesn't understand. As much as it's outputting something where it seems like it's intelligent and self-aware, it's not. It's specifically created to be human-like. So a lot of individuals, you probably used to have a pet rock or a teddy bear and you thought it was alive and you spoke to it. Essentially, it's the same thing, except it's talking back to you, giving you advice, and telling you what to do. So with the Caribbean, Jamaica specific in this case, us again, not being at the seat at the table means any inherent biases, anything put out about us, is going to influence these models and how they treat us.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a feedback loop. If
Right.
it believes that Jamaica is extremely violent and we're only dancehall and entertainment and weed and whatever it is and scammers, then
Mm.
it may not be apparent in every situation, but when it comes to the most important thing, it could then push back the same content to Jamaican youths to make them think that's the only way to get ahead in life.
Yeah.
So we have to really be there to understand how these systems work and again have control and influence in what they're showing us.
Yeah, for real. So we understand that, we are in a disadvantaged position when it comes to having these kinds of conversations. Well, when it comes to these kinds of technology, again, for all the reasons that Samantha and Adrian stated, and that Mr. Cordell Green stated as well. So when we're talking about AI ethics, what we're talking about is how AI is used, because someone says, remember that we created AI. AI didn't magically fall out of the sky. AI didn't happen upon us. We happened upon AI, or whatever the conversation is. Meaning that it is when it comes to the developer and the user of AI, that is where the problem comes in. It's not the technology that is going to create the problem. It's the person who is developing the technology and the purpose use of the technology that may become a problem. And so now we have to talk about what are those problems that we keep harping on about. So some of the first issues, again, as you know, that came out during that conversation at the Carnegie Institute, is about how Caribbean countries are very labor intensive. We depend on labor to survive. We have very limited industries in the Caribbean, and they're all labor intensive. So with artificial intelligence and the talk about automation, now when we talk about automation, we're talking about the potential of what AI could do, not necessarily what will happen, but we need to mitigate for potential uses of the technology. So when we talk about automation, AI being able to determine who gets a job, because that's another thing that the EU specifically pointed out in the proposed EU AI Act, talk about high risk applications of AI and how that affects jobs. What are some of the things that we in Jamaica need to consider, Samantha, Adrian, when it comes to how AI, the practical uses of AI as it relates to industry and business, and how that may impact labor? Who wants to go first?
I could
Adrian,
jump in.
as an
Sure.
entrepreneur, yeah, as an AI entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. So I would say I started in AI before I was an entrepreneur. So
Mm-hmm.
I developed systems and models for established entities for the
Yeah.
last 15 years, right? And then I jumped into entrepreneurship a little bit after. Um, so I would say my experience has benefited quite a lot from artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Sarapul, 2 years old, it would have not been able to reach where it is in 2 years if not for artificial intelligence. And one bit is automation. Robot process automation has been very
Yeah.
effective, automating decision making, um, basically leveraging specific individuals. So we have a very tight team and specific labs focused on certain areas. If we did not utilize a lot of these tools, custom made as well as out of the box, we'd need 5 times more individuals, right? Um, Everybody on this call, yes, AI is likely to take your job or take away a large portion of your job. So, with that being said, it's going to happen. So, you need to adapt. Um, the question we've been looking at is what jobs are on the chopping block right now. And yes, customer service ones, frontline staff, definitely. BPO in specific areas are going to be at risk as well, up to 90% impact. So this could literally destroy an entire Jamaican industry in a very short period of time with the implementation of these AI models that are easier to use. So it's not that these things have been around for a while. It's just a lot easier to use and tap into. That's really important. Um, but one thing we're actually seeing now is for entities that may have, let's say, 5 individuals with the same experience in a department, you may just need 2, because they can work alongside machine learning tools and be just as effective as that 5. So the one thing AI can't do right now is create. It can't. It's pretty much just copying human content, mixing it around, adding some randomization, and then trying to please the user. That's something that isn't going to destroy a lot of high-level jobs. So creativity, even though we're seeing DALI and stuff everywhere, it's not the end of the art industry. It's actually the opposite of that, because the AI is going to continue needing human content to be better at what it's doing. The concern, I guess Samantha can speak to that, is the copyright and ownership and generational wealth attached to that. How do you leverage your work to make sure they're not just stealing it? But first step is you need to become very aware of how to utilize these tools, and you need to do it on the job. I need to upskill yourself. So what we may see in the next 10, 15 years is, instead of you going to school and having one profession, one career, you're probably gonna have 2 or 3. You're gonna have to combine those things. So you may not be a marketer and an accountant either, or you may have to be both of those things to ensure that you provide the most value to individuals. And it's a global economy. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to work specifically here. My big recommendation for the government is upskilling the youths from now, so that they're not just consumers of AI, but they're also contributing and monetizing that experience.
Okay, Samantha?
Yeah, I don't see it as the big doom and gloom that everyone is looking at it in that way. I've been on this earth long enough to have seen this same conversation take place about different technologies.
Yeah.
And effectively, every time a new technology comes in, we go through this same conversation, because we go through a change in the labor force, right? So the agricultural revolution did exactly the same thing before. The industrial revolution did the same thing. And now, we've moved on to being in the 4th IR, right? So we're in the 4th industrial revolution. So, we need to think about how we can prepare ourselves for changes, because we should always expect things to remain to change. So where do I see, when in terms of what's coming across my desk, where do I see AI having an impact on the labor force? Well, you made a really, really good example. You gave a really good example at the very beginning, where you talked about the use of AI to make predictions in the recruitment, retention, and the other side of the labor market, and the exiting of people in the labor market. And we've seen this coming in for quite some time. And that's why, for example, in the EU, under the GDPR, there are rules around profiling and automated decision making, especially where they're going to have significant impact on individuals. And they require what's called a data protection impact assessment. We have that. We can see that's going to come in place. It's always been in. So we need to make sure that we have the checks and balances in place to ensure individuals are not being unfairly excluded from certain positions. The supply chain market is where we're really seeing the impact of AI, actually, because organizations are able to now really predict with much greater clarity exactly what their requirements will be in the year 2023, 2024. So what we won't see is some of the wastage on the labor market. We're talking about these big tech layoffs recently. Yeah, but a lot of that was because they were overinflated. They were bloated with stuff. And actually, had they been through this period before, we may not have had so many people finding themselves on the chopping block without much notice, because we would have been able to have this honest conversation around what is needed. We're also seeing it in manufacturing. So we're seeing tools being developed through AI that are able to use certain types of robotics to good precision as well. So that's where we're seeing some in Europe and in some parts of Asia, we're seeing people leave the labor force because of that. But I would just say I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think, as Adrian said, it's an opportunity for people to upskill. It's an opportunity also for us to get behind AI, because it actually helps the boat to move faster. And through having access to some of the open source AI platforms as well, actually organizations will be able to get themselves up to the same level as their, what do you call it, the first world, so to speak, leading companies. And so I see a lot of opportunity in the labor area, but also for entrepreneurs as well. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think we should expect this. We've had this with the printing press. We've had it with computers. We've had it with so many different types of technology. It's not that bad.
Okay. Understand that, yes, you are absolutely right. Every time there is a new thing that can cause massive disruption, economic disruption in the labor force, we have these kinds of conversations. I think these conversations are healthy because everybody gets to put on the line, okay, this is what our issues are, and then we can have a conversation about moving forward. We talk about, because initially what happens and what tends to always happen is that there's an initial disruption that happens, but then jobs are created, more jobs are created, people come back into the labor force because, as you said, they've reskilled or upskilled to make themselves more attractive in that labor force. So that's the cycle that tends to happen. The question is, it's all well and good to say, yes, you need to reskill so you are more attractive in the future labor force, all that good stuff. How are they going to do that? Because they're broke at the moment. At the moment, they may not have access, because that's another thing we need to talk about, the inequities that come with adopting certain kinds of technologies, right? So we say to people, you need to adapt because it's coming and it's inevitable. We can't stop it, but you need to adapt. My thing is, what are we saying to them in terms of how can you actually go about adopting? How long does that adoption take, and what happens in that period when they are adopting? Because they still have bills to pay, they still have a family to feed, they still have to live and survive. So what are they supposed to do within that period that they're adapting? Because adapting is not something that happens overnight. Adapting is a process, sometimes a long process, and sometimes we don't have the luxury of time to adapt because of, we're in a developing country, we're not in America or the US. So how are we telling them to adapt, and what are we telling them to do to be able to adapt but survive?
Okay, so I can jump in. I can chime in on
Yeah.
this. Money, access to information is not the issue.
Okay.
The AI community globally has been really, really open and supportive. And I learned it initially formally from a scientific background. But after I left academia, informal learning, online, getting access to individuals,
Self-learning.
professors. Yeah, and it was very easy. I didn't have to pay anything. So I got copies of books, you got lecture notes. That's when the online course boom just popped up. So it was very, very valuable. You could reach out to people, and we've still committed to that. People reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time, random persons. I'll provide as much advice as possible. Um, Shameless plug, we have a Caribbean training program that's completely free for individuals. You don't need any background. You don't need a high school diploma. You don't need anything. We have people who've never been to school before in the program who have certain issues with reading and writing. up to individuals that are in graduate programs. We have
And what's this
firefighters.
program about?
Sprout. It's called Sprout. So we teach data
Okay.
science and artificial intelligence,
Okay.
practically for the Caribbean.
Mhm.
So that was one issue with my learning, which was the content wasn't specific to my background
To
or the
the
Caribbean.
right.
So you had to
Yeah.
adapt certain things to that. So we made sure it's very Caribbean focused
Mhm.
on that. Yeah. Okay. Outside of the plug now. But the idea is if you are willing to learn it, it's all the content is there. You just need some guidance. The
Mhm.
timing component, you're extremely right about that. It requires a certain level of dedication.
Mhm.
But we teach individuals as well as corporate entities how to do this.
Mhm.
And depending on your timing
Mhm.
constraints, the
Mhm.
structure of your jobs, you'll be very able to learn this in a certain period of time. Full time, I would take somebody with 4 to 5 months experience and I'll put them in a position. But these are high value jobs that pay quite well.
But
Uh,
where they're starting from, Adrian,
so
if
that's
say for instance,
mhm,
I because you talked about BPO jobs and you
yeah.
say and Matthew Stone, who's an AI researcher at UA, agrees with you. He says in 5 to 10 years may not need BPO workers. So I work at a BPO conduit,
Hmm.
whatever. I work at a BPO, and right now what I do is I answer calls. I'm a solution technologist or whatever, technician or whatever they call themselves, right? And I know that eventually my job is going to be outsourced to a machine.
Hmm.
Yes. What do I need to do to make sure that I remain competitive in this industry? It may just be that I have a degree in something. Is this is just the only job I can get at the moment. So what do I need to do to figure out where I need to be and the information, the knowledge, the experience I need to gain in order to get there. I don't have access like you have access. You're in the academic space. You have access to the academic space. You're in the entrepreneurial space. You have access to networks within those spaces. I don't have any of those resources. What do I do?
So you don't need initial access. So my
Mm,
access was through reaching out to individuals. I
okay.
pushed myself out there. So it was always about marketing yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everyone's journey is different. We've dealt with a lot of persons. I've mentored a lot of individuals. I wouldn't say every single approach is the same.
Mm-hmm.
For that specific example with someone in the BPO, one, do you want BPO as a career? Is there something specific in there? So for me, my dream was to be an astrophysicist, right? From as a little toddler. Science fiction, AI was just a tool I would use for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I gravitated towards something more practical for the region, but
Mm-hmm.
still holding on to the components of that profession that I wanted. The same thing with BPO. Are you very interested in engaging with individuals? Do you like to sell? Do you like to create content? You have to be specific to that. If you know exactly what you want to do, which is the hardest part, I'll admit that, then you can figure out the specific tools. It may not be AI specific. It may be more focused on soft skills,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's something very important to
For
understand.
sure. Mm-hmm.
So the AI component is a tool you can use for any single business, any single industry. But it's not that you need to be an expert. You just need to know enough to understand how to utilize these tools. And a lot of times, a lot of tools you're using now have some level of AI, from very silly and stupid to a little more useful in terms of machine learning. I've tapped into it. You go on social media, as you said, a lot of people on social media are interacting with machine learning models right now and you don't even realize. You go on
Mm-hmm.
a website and there's an ad that's pushed in front of you. Yeah, that's machine learning. You go on Netflix, it tells you what to watch. Same thing. You go on Instagram, it shows you posts. Same thing. So it's just being very aware that you're being I wouldn't say manipulated, but yes, in certain instances you are being manipulated. You need to be
Mm-hmm.
more self-aware of certain things that are being presented to you are not necessarily through your control, right? But just start with some simple course and reach out. So I would say start with LinkedIn. Reach out to people in the career space that you're interested in that seem to have a certain level of experience. Ask them. Ask your colleagues as well because you don't want to get any success bias. If you talk to people who've already succeeded, their approach may not be what you need to do. So you need to also look out at failures. I spend a lot of time talking to failed entrepreneurs and ask them what they didn't do, and
Mm-hmm.
that saves a lot of time. So it's the same thing with respect to artificial intelligence for your industry. You have to reach out to people and ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Okay, got that. So you need to start marketing yourself better, and this is what everybody tells us all the time when it comes to
Mhm.
these kind of things. It's about how you market yourself, putting yourself out there. So we kind of went off tangent a little, but Adrian, while you're on, let's talk about some of the inherent biases in AI that can actually impact our economic growth. And
Mhm.
I was looking at, so there is a Caribbean artificial intelligence policy roadmap, right? So that is actually a thing. And the policy roadmap has 6 principles. So they're talking about resilience, governance, transformation, upskilling, conservation, and sustainability. And in the roadmap, these are some of the assumptions that they've made is AI is disruptive. AI must be regulated, and it's an existential threat to humanity. And that AI it will it again, going back to the impact that AI has on job, but also that AI is biased, right? So there are biases that are inherent to AI, that can have a significant impact on economic growth, especially in developing countries. So again, we're talking about how AI is developed and maintained, an incredible amount of energy that consumes, how that impacts climate change, and then how climate change impacts us. So that's one,
Mhm.
because we may not look at it that way, Adrian, but climate change is something that can impact our economic growth,
Right. Right.
right? So in the policy, they talk about disaster risk mitigation.
Mhm.
Are we prepared for an additional things that can impact climate change and the other disaster that can come from the development and maintenance of AI that can impact economic growth. They're also talking about digital transformation within the public sector, and the fact that we are actually behind. So how are we even having
Mhm.
a conversation about AI? We have not even adapted technology. Now COVID is over. Bosses want everybody to go back into the workplace. It's over, right? So it seems like we're going back to
Mhm.
pre-COVID times. So we've seen where the adoption of technology kind of increased during COVID times, but now that COVID is over, we seem to be reverting. So there are some things as it relates to the adoption of technology that can impact us economically. And then here comes AI, which, as Samantha says, is what is put into or fed into the system. So if there are already biases against Caribbean industries, Caribbean economic development, those are already going into the system and then can impact us. How do we mitigate against this?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. So on the let me start with the climate change component of it.
Mhm.
So the model isn't gonna understand the importance of climate change in a region, right? You have to
Right.
explicitly tell it. You need to be very certain of what does climate change mean, which means you need humans to know what climate change means and to really consider all of the stakeholders involved across the world. And
Mm.
a lot of times, a lot of the models that have gone really badly, it's not a situation of an individual being aware that they're biased. It's just they've grown up in a way, and you're pretty much trying to teach something that doesn't exist and doesn't understand anything,
Mm-hmm.
specifically how to treat the world, which is very, very hard, right? So I don't have a kid as yet, but I have a niece, and I can't imagine growing up a, a child basically to understand the world in other ways. Now imagine trying to teach something that doesn't know how to speak, doesn't know how to look at you, has no life experience. You can't directly talk to it in a way where it'll understand you, and it may never be able to interpret anything that you're saying. It's amazing that we've been able to come this far. Over a decade ago, I was in the climate research group at University of West Indies, and you have all this computing power to basically forecast, is it going to rain in a month or a year, or the impact it's going to have on Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
You can very cheaply now do something similar because of the access to cloud computing and a lot of these models. All you need is a little bit of money. So a big part of what we've been able to do is we're funded by Amazon, Nvidia, and Google. Our entire lab is, right? And that's the only way we've been able to actually innovate and develop in our lab.
Because it's expensive.
Yeah, it's extremely. We're talking about tens of thousands of US a month to run
Mhm.
all of these models. ChatGPT, around 3 million US a month estimated to actually run that. They're gonna make money back eventually, but
When
that's
they
the
go
thing.
pro.
Yeah, yeah, and they're working on some APIs and stuff like that. So it's very there's a lot of economic value in it, but that $3 million went into training cloud computing, which went into electricity,
Mhm.
which is linked to oil and fossil fuels, which of
Mhm.
course is just it's harder because you can't see it.
Right.
It's like an electric vehicle. So yes, electric vehicles they look really clean, but there's still fossil fuels involved in developing electric vehicles. It's
Mhm.
just in a different content and in different areas, and you don't really see it, but you feel very good about yourself. AI is a little um, scarier because it's so intensive on computing power, and you can
Mhm.
take for granted, and before you know it, you basically have uh, three centimeters in basically the I'm doing it right now. 3 centimeters effectively in water levels around the world, right? At a certain point in time. So it's inadvertently causing a crisis, not because of itself, because of humans. I'm more afraid of humans, frankly, than I am of AI. If the
Mhm.
world's gonna get destroyed by AI, it's because
Of how we
somebody,
use it. Yeah.
yeah, and made it say, oh, and the one thing I've seen is, oh, the reason the AI is gonna destroy humans is because we're destroying the Earth, and it's gonna think practically. There's other life forms that make more sense for the Earth,
Mhm.
which again we're just talking stuff like that. For the
Yeah.
biases component, where you're talking about, you need a certain level of bias when you're doing these models. It's inbuilt because it is a system that doesn't understand and doesn't have access to the entire world. So it's
Mhm.
using a sample, and based on that sample, trying to make decisions. So a lot of research is being done now to figure out how do we control these biases in a way where it's fair. So we actually do a few projects for local entities because local entities are actually going in that direction and being very self-aware of
Mhm.
the impact in the finance sector as well. So we're not sleeping on it. It's just we have to develop things specifically for us because again, our culture, our background, the diversity in what we're doing is is so immense for such a small country
Mhm.
with 2-3 million people. Plus, we have more diaspora than we do actual Jamaicans living in Jamaica,
Mhm.
right? So we're connected, interconnected with different cultures and stuff. And AI is not able to understand that because, frankly, humans cannot understand that as yet. So we have to put the things in control. But
Mhm.
like what Samantha said, this is new opportunity for jobs. So AI ethicists, AI managers, those are jobs that we can tap into.
Mhm.
So and you don't have to be extremely technical. You just have to be creative, empathetic, and understanding to tap into these stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm excited, still a little cautious about the impact it could have.
Yeah, Samantha, thanks, Adrian. Samantha, when and we're still on this entire thing, this entire conversation is about ethics. I hope you guys realize that. You guys watching, when we talk about the inherent biases in AI, we're not necessarily talking about the technology itself. We're talking about uses of the technology, as Adrian said, right? And how the technology is being used. I'm sure when Microsoft is linking up with ChatGPT to create whatever they're creating, and these are starting, they're not thinking, oh, what about the people in the Caribbean? They're never thinking about us. Capitalism never really thinks about the people. It thinks about profit, right? And so whatever they can do to make more profit, to minimize cost, to maximize profit, that's what they are going to do. And that can also have an economic impact on us because we're a smaller economy that is dependent on some of these larger economies. And so sometimes when they make decisions, in fact, whenever they make decisions, we have problems. So talk about some of those biases, some of those things that the government may need to consider when you're talking about creating laws to protect industries, creating laws to mitigate the socioeconomic impact on these kinds of technologies and the proliferation of these kinds of technologies by big business, especially.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of questions within that. Firstly,
Yes.
because, you know,
Yes.
you know, we really have to break it down. So let's just think about: are we talking about Jamaica as consumers of the AI systems?
Mhm.
Are we talking about Jamaica as being involved in development of the AI systems?
Mhm.
You know, we're coming to this as like AI is just this one big thing. It's
Yes.
just another piece of technology
Yeah.
that is now of general application, right? And within that piece of technology, I just want to touch upon the environmental impacts, because a lot of that's not even yet clear.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know, and
part
some
of
of
the
us are
impact.
even,
Yeah.
yeah, even some of us are quite biased around that as well. So the carbon footprint on newer technologies that engage in amplification or federation of information,
Mhm.
such as blockchains, etc., they are resource intensive, as Adrian mentioned. And they're actually, new technology accounts for something like 4% of the world's carbon footprint,
Mhm.
right? At a time when, and I like to lump the Caribbean and Africa together because we are quite similar. We need to remember that. And I like to bridge the Atlantic
Yeah, and
between, right?
we're the two regions that are lowest on the AI readiness index. Coincidence? I
Lowest on
think
the
not.
AI readiness index, but for the last 5 or 6 years, big tech have strategically attempted to place themselves into our data infrastructure in order to extrapolate the data to inform its systems.
Yes.
That's why we need to be careful.
Hmm.
We need to, so when we just, let's just talk about the environmental
Yeah.
impacts, because actually the environmental impact, the negative impact may be offset by a positive impact.
Hmm.
Where we have artificial intelligence, we are more likely to have less wastage. We're more likely to have more efficiency in manufacturing processes,
Production.
in exactly, right? So we may even see, even with these electric vehicles, the talk is that a driverless car makes fewer mistakes,
Hmm.
and as a result of that, we're likely to see a benefit. Hey, we don't know that yet, so we don't
Hmm.
know on either side, but there are arguments on both sides of the environmental coin.
Yeah.
When it comes to the inherent biases, I told you I'm a digital anti-racist warrior, right?
Mm.
AI is inherently racist because it has primarily been made by people in the US, Asians, and people in Europe. It
Who make up the top percent of the global readiness index? Not a coincidence. Any of
absolutely,
this.
and I mean, I don't listen to any of these things, any of those reports. I'll tell you why. Because to Adrian's point earlier, when I was at school, my teacher taught me computers are thick. They only do what you want them to do. And data has no meaning until you put meaning to it. So
Exactly.
we can move the goalposts and make everything sound however we want it to sound. I can't see how the Caribbean could be any less ready for AI than another um, another region, unless we're talking about the availability of, for example, 5G telecommunication,
Hmm.
right? So if we're talking about the speed of communications, but listen,
They,
it's not
they
all
they gave
gravy.
they gave a summary. So they talk about the data representation, data availability, infrastructural development, human capital development, innovation capacity. I don't know. I actually don't know what that means. The size of our technology sector. And when it comes to government, they talk about government adaptability, the vision that the government has for the country moving forward as it relates to technology, the governance and ethical frameworks and policies, and the digital capacity. So those are some of the pillars they say that determine readiness. But yeah, you are talking about the environment.
Yeah, but so in terms of if we look at that report, the report in itself is inherently biased, right?
Mm, mm,
So let's think about what biases are we seeing come into AI.
yeah.
Without a doubt, there is strong race bias
Mm-hmm.
brought into AI. It's something that we cannot even argue against. It depends on the use case for the AI, but on many occasions. So, for example, my company, what we do is we do digital compliance assessments. So we build out a digital compliance framework which allows our clients to build technology that is fair and ethical. So we break down the technology and take into consideration any impacts, negative impacts it may have on the discriminatory impact, the privacy impacts, and wider impacts of the technology. So we definitely see race bias. We see race bias in things like facial recognition systems. We see race bias in some of the outputs around insurance, in the outputs around medical data. We
Jobs.
see exactly. We just
Who
see
gets
so
what
much.
jobs? Yeah.
Who gets what job? And sometimes it's not even. It's not even based upon skin color or anything like that. It's based upon profile by
Yeah.
and large. And people within a certain profile are automatically assumed to be of a certain ilk. So
Right.
when it comes to the Caribbean, that's why I used that example earlier, seems a bit wacky, but you Google Caribbean right now, you will only see beaches, right? That's the image that's going to be put out. So we see that having an impact on the workforce. How many countries outside of the Caribbean think to employ within the Caribbean, especially Anglophone countries where people are educated to the same standard or higher, but they're not thinking to employ within the Caribbean. Why? Because it is not known for business.
Or capacity to innovate. Like the index.
Absolutely. Right. Okay. Yet still, in my personal experience, the Caribbean has been much more ready for technological advances than even the US at times. I have been able to use. I am a techie tete, right? For I am able to here much quicker than I often am in the US. Cannot deny.
Sorry, repeat that
Because
last part, Sam. You kind of chipped out.
cut out, yeah. I'm able to use new technology here often much quicker than I am in the US. Why? Because technology is often deployed in areas with smaller populations. That way we can see how the entire country can manage it. The US has a huge population. So for us in the UK, when I was in the UK, we would always acknowledge that the US's technology, general use of technology, was way behind the UK. But I digress. But the point I'm making is there are significant biases built into the systems. There may even be bias around capability. That's the point that I'm trying to make. The capability. What does education look like here? To what extent are the people educated? There's biases around marriage rates. There's bias around the makeup of society. So it's very interesting, but it all comes back to the data that has been, in my experience, the data that has been put into those systems. So it's a challenge that we need to overcome. I'm actually going to the UNESCO Internet for Trust conference, which is focused around regulation of digital platforms, AI being one of them. I've been trying to contribute largely and give a Caribbean voice, and even to some extent a Black voice.
Yeah.
Because and that's the other thing, Caribbean and Black is not synonymous, right?
Yeah.
Necessarily, but for some reason AI systems believe that too.
Yeah. Can we jump back a little? You said something that I find intriguing. You said that some of these countries, I don't know if you mean countries or big business, use data or try to tap into data from Caribbean, African regions. What do you mean?
Yeah, so for example, we started to see, I think about 5 or 6 years ago in particular, we started to see the Facebook, as it was called at the time, trying to build subwater cables, so undersea cables, to connect the African continent. What business does Facebook have in underwater cables? It's not a telecommunications company by and large, but it's able to get access to the data. We see, for example, the controls around data privacy are slightly lower in the Caribbean, depending on where you are. So we see companies taking data through WhatsApp, we see companies taking data through various technologies and able to use that data for their own purposes because there hasn't been significant regulation around that. Something that was very interesting a while back that we saw, WhatsApp was nearly very, very successful in Brazil in being able to capture payment remittance data via WhatsApp. And it was unbeknownst to all of us privacy practitioners. We were wondering how is this even permitted? Because it didn't require any form of consent or anything. Fortunately, the Bank of Brazil pulled the plug on it at the very last minute, just before the go live. But we've seen a number of attempts from companies to effectively get hold of that data and do it via surreptitious means.
Yeah.
The response from a number of countries has been to put in place what we call data localization laws, which focus around the sovereignty of the data. You see, for example, we even saw Nigeria kick back and ban Twitter, if you recall.
Yes.
Nearly a couple of years ago now. And that's somewhere where, as the Caribbean grows in its preparedness for new digital technologies, where the laws would be more advantageous if we started to look at not necessarily data localization, but certainly strong requirements around data governance, not just about data, personal data, but data governance on the whole for organizations operating or having access to data belonging to Jamaicans or the Caribbean people.
In the Caribbean Artificial Intelligence Policy Roadmap, Adrian, it says so far AI is exacerbating structural inequalities. Samantha just talked about some of those, and creating new inequities, and millions are falling below the digital literacy poverty line. And then it goes on to say that automated decision-making technologies are impacting decision-making on employment and labor. Samantha just talked about that. Social interaction, healthcare, education, media freedom of expression, access to information, privacy, Samantha just talked about, democracy, discrimination, and weaponization, and a whole lot more. So if you were to advise the government, because this policy roadmap is supposed to be a larger Caribbean-based framework that individual governments can then pull from when they're creating their own localized laws as it relates to regulating these systems, because I don't think anybody here disagrees that regulation is always needed, right? So based on all of this and all of, again, some inherent biases and some inherent problems that will come along with these things, how would you advise government, or let's simplify it, what are two things that you would say that the government definitely needs to consider when they're talking about creating policies and frameworks around AI and other technologies like AI to protect local industries, to protect data, and to protect human rights issues that can arise?
All right.
I hope that wasn't too
I'll try and summarize a response.
mm-hmm.
I'd say that's where my compliance background taps in. So
Yeah.
being with BAJ, FSC for a number of years, the level of seriousness that they take when it comes to monitoring the financial health of organizations, they need to do that and more for general technology, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence. So a big part of that is to provide guidelines for organization. So this is the corporate part we're looking at. So corporate entities under BOJ and other regulators, you need guidelines, you need reporting guidelines, which means you need a certain level of expertise. So when it comes to that bias, for instance, a funny thing about a lot of these models, we've actually played around with it, is when it comes to applications, if you take off the name and any specifics, you could potentially identify the age, the gender, and the ethnicity of individuals, right? So why is that? There are certain learned things when you're growing up, and the model can inherently understand it. The concern is if you have a specific ethnicity, developing the checklist tool, it's going to learn the biases through that, right? So you need to be very aware of those biases. So the government needs to put something in place where that is something they have to report on. Even general metrics, what percentage of persons get access to loans by age and gender, you need to give that to us on a monthly basis. It doesn't necessarily mean there's bias. It could speak to, well, a certain level of bias. Are you going after certain clients? Or is a situation where you present yourself in a way where only types of clients want your services? The other big part is we have a very huge informal sector
Yes.
in Jamaica, and it's driving so much value to the economy and creativity, and it's not necessarily stifled by controls, but at the same time, basically, consumer protection is a concern. It needs to educate these persons, incentivize them, and provide. This is a bias on my part because I would like some funding from the government. I don't like being so funded from external entities. Is that you need to subsidize and provide access to cloud computing and training, do some partnerships, and give us access to that so we can play around. Because a big part of this is, local individuals need to just, in a very low risk environment, tap into these technologies, right? They should be able to just play around with it effectively to see if it makes sense, because that's where innovation comes from. It's not necessarily driven by a need at this point, but it's about being able to express yourself, right? So the government needs to be very clear on that. Schools, we need to go to the kids from now and explain to them data protection. We need to explain to them all these technologies, what machine learning, the general field of artificial intelligence is, um, fossil fuels, environmental concerns, all these things need to be taught from a primary prep school level, and then consistently brought up till you reach university. So local university usually have like these mandatory foundational courses: English, governance, I think some stuff with law, very straightforward. Uh,
Maths.
and history, yeah, maths is extremely important. So I did maths and physics as my undergrad degree, and I got so much value out of that when I went into corporate, because problem solving was fundamental to that degree. But yes, you need to start from early with them so they understand the value of their data. They are, because currently we're employees of these large tech companies. We provide our data for free, right? Samantha said tapping into our data, using us as a test bed, and then pushing us to more advanced economies. But we're also the consumer, so we're working for them, but also paying for that through time and access to our lives. So if we're doing that, we need to have influence and control, and like we've been saying, a seat at the table. Those are.
What I'm hearing you say, Adrian, is that we need steam. Isn't that what we've been saying for like
Oh yeah, yeah,
donkey
definitely.
years now?
Oh, we do. And me personally, why it hit me is when I graduated, I could not find a job. So I would go on interviews, and the first thing I would get is, "Oh, you want to teach maths and physics in high school? Why are you applying to this company?" Versus my colleagues, my friends who migrated, working on Wall Street, going to there's a better understanding that these degrees are so important to the economy.
Right.
And these learnings aren't specific to science-based fields, right? It's problem solving is something you need in any industry that you tap into. So STEAM should be a part of every single degree in some way, shape, or form. Those are the two main if we're just trying to
Yeah.
chop it down in a couple
Chop
of
it
minutes.
down.
But,
Yeah.
but yeah, many other recommendations we can tap into. But we are, I think, even with that report. So I don't know anyone who contributed to that report, right? So I've been in the field over 15 years, right? You would think maybe not to say I'm dissed by not included, but to say we don't know who the stakeholders were that they
I can
contacted
tell you.
to get this feedback.
I
Yeah.
can tell you, let me quickly tell you,
Okay.
because you touched on something that made me go, when I was reading this, because I'm like, okay, so who are the people that contributed to this? So
Yeah.
Cordell Green. Cordell Green is, as you said, the chairman of the Broadcasting Commission, and they
Mhm.
even formed what they call an artificial intelligence initiative that he also chairs. Again, the website has been down for long as well, so I can't even tell you
Mhm.
who is a part of that. We also have Erica Simmons. Did you guys know that there is a, and I quote, fourth industrial revolution technology R&D center at the Caribbean Maritime University in Jamaica?
Wasn't aware of that. That's interesting.
Right. So the executive director of that is Miss Erica Simmons. Now, who is Erica Simmons? Erica Simmons is the head of the Jamaica Civil Global Technologies. Blah, 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 blah. I think she is the head of the engineering, Jamaica engineering. Oh gosh, I don't want to tell a lie. She is the head of the Jamaica Association for Engineers.
Okay.
You know that group. We know that group.
Yeah,
They have
I've heard
an
of them.
office,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, I've heard of
I
them.
think she's the president or chairman of that group. A part of
Mhm.
the conversation, some of the other stakeholders, because in this document they talked about, some of the stakeholders that were involved. They said they had input from government, government policymakers, and other stakeholders, and
Mm,
UNESCO was heavily involved in this. So, uh,
uh,
well,
I'd
yeah,
I'd
UNESCO
be wary. I'd be
who that
wary.
brought all of this together. They
Yeah.
had a series of workshops. They said um, they had workshops around talking about upskilling, the impact of AI and broad section of industries, including the
Mhm.
future of work, hiring practices, blah, blah. It went on to explain, and I can send you the link, agent, so you can have a better idea. It says the forum from various stakeholders. Yeah, so it basically just
Mhm.
said government, stakeholders, and other people. But in the Carnegie conversation, which actually talks about how this policy was developed, there was Erica Simmons, there was Cordell Green, and there was this other lady from Barbados. I think her name is Stacey Russell. Don't know if you've
Mhm.
heard of her. um Stacey Natasha Russell. She's from Barbados, 26 years in journalism. She's an advocate for promoting awareness around artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and privacy and data protection. She's based in the UK. I don't know if you know her, Samantha. And I forgive me for saying that. I don't think all black people in the UK know each other,
No, I
but
have come across her.
Okay.
a space, which is why I'm asking.
Mhm.
Right? So these are the people who were involved in the conversation. Oh, Dr. Jones Sessional, Erica. Erica is
Mhm.
doing great things. I never heard of Erica before or about this center that is at the my thing
Yeah.
is we are having these conversations, and I was surprised about how in-depth the conversation we are having in the Caribbean about AI is. And I'm going, I've never heard of any of it. Have you?
Uh, no, when you said that document, it
Yeah.
looked a bit familiar, but I have no colleagues that would have contributed to that, and we are pretty much at the forefront um, of
Which is what I'm
development.
saying. I'm
But
saying a lot of names were absent
yeah, so it's
from
I guess it's
this.
one perspective. They
Yeah.
got one
Mhm.
area of feedback from the ecosystem, which we may be higher on there than we actually realize. I think
Mm.
that's important. And the
Uh,
methodology that they use for the ranking. I don't know if that's in the end of the document.
Well, the
That's something
global
important
index had
also.
nothing to do with the Caribbean. That's from
Okay.
Oxford Insights, and it was something that
Yeah.
they were asked to do. Apparently, this has been going on for 4 years now. This is the fourth edition. What I found interesting about the artificial intelligence policy, Caribbean framework or policy, is that a lot of the information in it was external to the Caribbean. Like they had a lot of quotes
Yes.
from people from UN and all sorts of different major global international governmental regulation governance bodies. And
Yeah.
even when they talked about some of the challenges in the Caribbean, again, it was not very specific to the Caribbean. There was a lot of generalizations, and I'm having read through it, I still don't come away with a sense that they firmly grasp, with a firm sense of what is happening in the Caribbean, what is the potential in the Caribbean, and then what they're going to do with this framework. So it's very loose. I will give you that. It's very loose and have a lot of white people quoted in it. I'm just saying, a lot of white
But that's the
European people quoted in it. What's that? What's that,
that's
Samantha?
that's the unfortunate reality about the number of the reports and even the frameworks developed around AI and other emerging technologies. If we look at the genesis of even some of the European legislation, we can date it back to the World Economic Forum. So the reality is right now we are in a situation where private industry is using a lot of these large organizations as vehicles
Yeah.
to essentially government lobby, right? So the government lobbying of old, the strategy before has come up, it's dead now. Facebook seeing it, Meta seeing it significantly, Google
Yeah.
seeing it, lots of challenge from regulators. So, you dig a bit deeper now.
Yeah.
And so that's I think the reality, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to make sure that I'm at the UNESCO conference,
Right.
That's a great
just at
point,
Should
least to
Samantha.
should
see.
should we
That's a
should we
good point.
be should we be concerned then that we have a non-local body, UNESCO? I know that UNESCO is heavily involved in the Caribbean. They've done all sorts of good stuff. I'm not saying anything bad about UNESCO people, but should we be concerned that UNESCO is who is leading the conversation about the development and use of artificial intelligence in the Caribbean, with some stakeholders that people who are on the ground don't seem to know, or they're not invited to be in these kinds of conversations. So we're having these high level conversation with an international body, with some stakeholders that are not familiar to the actual people on the ground, which is something that we always do. By the way, this is how we always operate. Is that a concern? Because who is representing the everyday person? Who's representing our interests? Do they even really understand what the everyday concern is of everyday people? Do they understand that everyday people may not even be aware of the potential of these kinds of technology and the potential impact on them individually, much less as a society economically? Who represents that in these bodies when these policies are being drafted and these frameworks are being drafted? Should we be concerned about this?
Definitely.
Hell yes, should be very concerned. But there's a slight difference in operations when you're not from the Caribbean, I'll say. It's not about being invited, it's about putting yourself into it. And if we wait to have a seat at the table, no one's gonna send you the invite. No one's gonna draw up the chair and say, "Come sit down." And if they do, you better be very worried about it because they already set up the agenda. Okay.
Right.
So in my experience, what we need to do is make sure that we are making the right connections so that we can be included and be there. We should always be worried, but to my point, personally, what I'm seeing is this is a global phenomenon right now. It seems almost a fait accompli that the genesis for many of these frameworks is from outside. But in terms of the question I think has to always be, what can we do from within side as well? So if you're talking about the regulations around not just AI, but other technologies,
Yeah.
what do we need to have in place either in a single regulation
Mm.
or in a number of different pieces of regulation? We need to be thinking about competition. We need to make sure that there's no anti-competitive behavior taking place. We
Oh,
want to
yeah.
talk, right? You want to talk about AI? You want to talk about Uber in Jamaica? Uber is AI, right? And its algorithm in some parts, and the algorithm that Uber has been using was open to challenge in the Netherlands. You know, the in the Netherlands, the driver said, we legally requested to see the algorithm. Why? Because they were some drivers who happened to be darker skinned were not receiving the same jobs as other drivers. You know, then you want to look at consumer protection, like any other product or service. How are we protecting consumers? Well, how are we making sure that the right decisions are being made for consumers? So, to Adrian's point, one of the things that we see around AI is it starts to influence mortgage offers, insurance, especially medical insurance for people. So how do we ensure that consumers are not being discriminated against because of the profile that they belong to?
Yeah,
Then,
that's a great point.
yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, let's take an example of
Mhm.
make sure my geography is correct, but like Kingston 8, Kingston, yeah, take it like Kingston 8, for example. You'll have some parts of Stony Hill and you have some parts of cassava piece. Okay, do some people how will they bundle that up? So do some people automatically be charged something more expensive because people think that it's a more affluent area in general if you're all from the same area, but yet still you actually live a very different life to somebody else within the area? we
Yeah.
see that really we see that really commonly, actually.
I'd say it's I can't say much, but let's say it's possibly likely going on.
Listen, I've been seeing this my entire career. This is something that this is why I work against digital discrimination, because it's
Yeah.
something that we see all the time in marketing in particular. You can go to areas where people receive only pizza and chicken and chips, and then the other people are receiving Indian restaurant and Chinese restaurant, right? And Italian and stuff like that. These things have significant impacts because what you offer people determines a lot about how their lifestyle will be.
And
I'm only offered.
Mhm.
sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was going to say, if I'm only offered bad food, if I'm only offered the high rate loan, if I'm only offered basically, if you put a ceiling on my expectation of what I can have, then I will live in that way, and I will be forever pushed into this perpetual cycle of
Sorry,
that lifestyle.
for sure.
Mhm.
You said something earlier that kind of struck me when you talk about how do they determine prices of goods and services within certain areas, where within one geographic area, within one area code, there's income disparities, massive income disparities. So let's look at something like broadband internet and how we decide who gets access, the type of access they get, and the cost for broadband internet, which I think in some areas are prohibitive. So within
Mhm.
Jamaica, we already have digital inequalities that are happening. There's a massive digital divide as it relates to accessibility. So we have a concentration of access of access to digital instruments, digital devices, Wi-Fi, etc. in urban areas, Kingston, St. Andrew, and its environments. But the further out you go, is the less access you have. But then there is no difference in pricing in terms of being able to access that broadband internet, right? So
Mhm.
right now, say I'm paying $7,000 and odd dollars for broadband internet. I live in Portmore. You're paying $7,000 and odd dollars in broadband internet. Across the road from my community, first of all, within a couple streets of my community, there's income disparity. Across the
Mhm.
road from my community is income disparity. So when we do this broad-based generalization, sometimes based on, again, using AI technology, that's a part of it, where we talk about automated decision making. That's what we're talking about, and this is what it looks like in real time. This is what it looks like practically. So when we use automated decision making to decide who pays what based on where they are, we are not taking into consideration certain nuances within that same geographical area. And as you said, it's the data and the inherent bias in the data that can have this kind of output, and that we need to regulate again. So when you say
Yeah.
that, that instantly jumped out at me, because I remember reading about that years ago. Like, so how do we decide how much we pay for light bill, how much we pay for water bill, how much we pay for internet? A lot of these decisions are not necessarily a person sitting in an office working out the maths. It's automated decision
Yeah.
making that
Yeah.
is taking place, and it is causing problems for people to be able to actually keep up and pay their bills, right?
Hmm.
Because they're being charged at similar rates
Yeah.
as somebody else because of an area code that they live in, not taking into consideration income inequalities and other socioeconomic disparities that are happening within that just one little space. So that's we've not even regulated against that outside of
Hmm.
technology.
Yeah. So
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
sp-
We even
speaking
see.
to that,
Oh, sorry, Adrian. Go
okay,
ahead.
okay. So with respect to that, that's a great example that you definitely the human I need controls in place. So
Mhm,
the big promise of a lot of these tools, machine learning tools,
mhm,
and automated decision making was you're taking out the human error and human bias out of the conversation.
mhm,
So remember years back, global financial crisis, subprime mortgages were individuals basically complicating things unnecessarily and created very odd products because they want to take advantage of different persons. They're betting on the market to make short term profits, right?
mhm,
Then it shifted to okay, if we create these automated tools that just feed on data, it's going to be more objective, right?
mhm,
Without realizing again that data was collected by humans, it's about humans. So there's a lot of errors and inconsistencies and biases in there. With
mhm,
that thing you're saying about broadband, one very simple uh, cost component there is literally a human saying, "Oh, this area has more crime because it seems lower income, so we're going to have to put in an additional piece just in case they try and pull down lights and wires." It
mhm,
may not necessarily be true, but it's an assumption. It feeds its way into the data, and the model just charges them the same or a little bit more. And
mhm,
then, oh, because we can charge them the same amount or more, we will. And there's no regulator telling us we can't do it.
mhm.
And by the time they figure it out, would have made billions off of these
Off of it
individuals anyway.
already, yeah.
And oh, but we don't even understand why it's doing certain stuff. There are a lot of instances of models put out by very large corporations with
Mm.
thousands of data scientists and AI engineers with PhDs in the craziest things ever, and they still make these basic mistakes because they fundamentally forget it's humans that they're dealing with, and they should
Yeah,
care about. There should be fiduciary requirements for all of
right.
these models, right?
So
It's disappointing. Yeah.
yeah, so we're already seeing issues with the automated systems, because then when you are 2 minutes late on paying your bill by a certain times, and they tell you that the system automatically just shuts you down,
Hmm.
after a while, it's the system. It's the system. It's not us, it's the system. So we're already having these kinds of issues with these automated kind of system. And my thing is, who built the system? What was the purpose of this system? And you told the system to do that. The system didn't go, you know what, Kadia, you 5 minutes late, bloop, $250 extra. Add it to your bill that you are already late in paying because you're having issues coming up with the money. And so we're just gonna automatically cut you off. So when they come now to put in these digital readers, meter readers, and these digital, it's just another, it's just automated systems that they're putting in place to take away the responsibility and accountability from themselves in a lot of instances, But also these systems are biased and have biases built into them that can negatively impact you. Because if you're thinking about building your credit score, but every month you're a couple days late because you might get paid, you're outside of the formal system, Adrian, you're in the informal system, and you know how that go. You don't necessarily get paid on the 25th, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to wait a couple extra days to get paid so you can pay your bills, but they cut you off at a certain point because the system. You know what I mean, Samantha? So we're already seeing
Yeah,
the
for sure.
inequalities with these kind of automation systems. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Adrian. What are some of the considerations? And I know you would have said some before, but what are some of the main considerations, two main ones you can think of that the government needs to consider when they're talking about building an equitable framework around AI and other technologies that are already impacting our lives and will continue to impact our lives in greater and greater measures going forward?
I'm going to spin it a little. Governments are notoriously bad at regulating technology in guidance, frameworks, whatever, because the decision-making process in government is a lot slower. So we see that globally. And then when you come to looking at countries that are now embracing regulation of data or technology for the first time, there's quite an uphill. There's a bit of a learning curve. Let's just put it that way. So let's not really always focus on government frameworks. Government needs to focus around just making sure that the legislation, even existing legislation, is applicable to the digital society that we're living in.
It's not.
Well, exactly. So let's focus upon that piece there. Yeah, just get that piece done, right? But where I think what I think is more important is it's incumbent upon each of us. So I think there should be standards, and international standards as well would help. But I think it's incumbent upon each of us as developers and also procurers of technology to make sure that we have standards and frameworks that require the technology to pass muster around fairness, ethics. It's ethics and fairness pretty much the same, but ensuring that it's not discriminatory. If they are building technology for us, applications for us, what we should be really looking at is making sure that there are no unintended consequences of the technology that can have harmful effects on individuals. I want to give you two particular use cases where I'm seeing very harmful effects in life just generally today. The first one, if you go to a gas station in Jamaica, there is a price variation that I have never seen anywhere else in
Depending
the world.
on which one you go.
Depending on where you go. Yeah? And not just which company, where it's located.
Yes.
So these dynamic pricing matrices are problematic because they are able to make predictions about gas supply and gas use that means that it's actually has a discriminatory impact on certain individuals. So some people may be very happy to use it at that price, but for some people, that is the only place that they can really go when their car is already on low to go and top up their gas. Another area where we really see discriminatory impact, especially as Caribbean people, is around content regulation in social media platforms. Do you know, for example, you're a member of the Carnival fraternity, in which Jamaica happily is, do you know how much Carnival content has been banned on the basis of obscenity and nudity? That is a practice of a cultural tradition. It doesn't necessarily have the same meaning, yet it has been lumped in with the people who are using Instagram, for example, as a lead generator for OnlyFans. So where we have content regulation that doesn't understand how people are communicating, the nature of the language, the
communication.
cultural references, okay, that is having a significantly discriminatory impact on individuals. Individuals have been shadow banned. Individuals have had their content identified as misleading, or as I said, obscene, bad language. And the further reaching consequences have actually been seen in Africa. We have seen that the failure of AI systems to understand cultural references have actually led to sectoral or civil type war within countries. So it's led to people who speak a particular dialect being targeted and being seen as perhaps terrorist is a big word, but anti-state, right? And that has had an impact on the communications those people have had. So what I'm saying is we see significant impacts there. How could you expect the government to regulate big tech? Big tech is bigger than the country, right?
Certainly make more money than us. GDP,
Absolute
they make more
GDP
money than
wise,
us.
certainly.
Yeah.
No, but number of users. Jamaica has 3 million people.
Exactly.
Okay, you know. So what we really need to see is a focus on standards that are going to come out of groups. I'd love to see the JTDA come up with some kind of standards, because I think it's a much faster way of operating, even just guidelines around adoption of new technologies, procurement of new technologies, development of new technologies. So there's a three-piece: consumer, business, and the actual creators piece. But to sit and rely on government to get there,
We have a long way. We have a long way to go, because right now there's a conversation happening in the U.S. because ChatGPT is being sued, and the basis of the suit is around copywriting. Sorry, the copywriting issues, because of how these systems are using data, as you said, for their machine learning process, deep learning processes, and doing research and development, etc. And persons are not being paid for the data that they are using. So though there's a suit in the United States, several actually, suing around data privacy and protection issues, as well as around copyright issues. And my thought while reading intellectual property, and reading through that, I'm going, what is going to happen in Jamaica? Because we don't have laws. We still haven't even implemented laws around jam decks yet. We're still stuck there, right? And so when I hear our prime minister say something like, "Oh, the government is taking firm steps to move Jamaica towards, or transition Jamaica towards a digital society," I'm like, what? I'm not sure the government understands what a digital society actually really kind of looks like. Because having Wi-Fi in towns is public Wi-Fi is not making us a digital society. I'm sorry. Having a digital currency that doesn't really work and nobody's bought into, that the banks are still grappling with to implement, that's not. So I'm saying we have a ways to go, and I'm concerned that the people within our government don't necessarily understand themselves what is happening, and as Samantha rightfully says, they're so behind that sometimes we can't necessarily depend on them. In fact, they are going to need help to put these policies in place, because they don't have a clue. And we saw that happen when we saw the Amber debacle. We saw that the government don't, because the conversations that was happening in the media, in the public, and you were on the show to talk about it, Samantha. We had a conversation about it. Clearly, it wasn't handled properly. Not even the media could ask the proper questions to the government as to what's happening and why this is happening. So we have an illiterate media. we have an illiterate public, and we have an illiterate government, and that's going to spell problems. And we have an illiterate business sector, because when banks are thinking about where do they put a branch, and every time a bank in Jamaica says it's going digital, guarantee that means they're going to close certain locations. And then when they close the locations, they're already disenfranchised people, because then you have these people that are going, so want to close the branch now, Scotia. What are we supposed to do? Are you go, oh, well, you have these ABM machines. We don't know how to use the ABM machines, sir, ma'am. And it's not just banks, but even JPS went digital and just closed down certain branches, because that's what digital means, not taking into consideration that this is not a human-centered decisions you're making.
Yeah.
And again, going back into using these technologies to make decisions that are about profit, not about what is right for the general welfare and well-being of the people that you are supposed to be serving. So you're absolutely right, Samantha and Adrian. When we talk about this, it's all well and good to say government needs to have policies and framework, etc. But if they don't know, and if there's in headlights like we are, and if they're illiterate, if we're illiterate, if our business sector is illiterate.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So
What now? What's next? What do we do? So we're wrapping up, and the last question I'm throwing out to you and Samantha is, what do we do as countries that are illiterate? And when I said illiterate, I mean digitally, technologically illiterate. Not to say that we don't have people here who are amazing. Adrian is on the show. Samantha is on the show. If you look at all our guests previously, talent is here. Well, we can have a different conversation about whether or not we believe and invest in those talents, because we do not. But the talent is here, the minds are here, but on a whole, we are technologically and digitally illiterate. So the question I'm throwing out to you is, how do we move from a point of illiteracy into a point of more innovation, to a point of more capacity, where we are now adapting, implementing, innovating for the greater societal good, if that's even a consideration we need to be having. That's a whole other conversation, Adrian.
that's a big question. So when you mentioned about government and all these things, I always try and separate the hype of it. I'm showing that I'm doing these amazing things that are being done overseas, so that you'll vote for me in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So I'm whatever, versus the practicality of it. I think a lot of these companies and politicians drink their own Kool-Aid, and don't look at what is the actual practical and useful thing. Let's just introduce this technology because everybody's talking about it.
Yes.
Over the last 3 months, ChatGPT, a lot of our clients have come to us about it, saying they want to integrate it as soon as possible. And I've had to do sessions with them to show them the limitations of it, and that it wouldn't work for their use cases right now, because there are a lot of issues with bias and variance and a lot of inherent risks in that. So aside from being an AI engineer and researcher for a while, my background is also risk management and compliance and strategy. And they may not be considered technical fields per se, but you still need lawyers, you still need auditors, you still need governance, you still need management, you need practical individuals in place to monitor this. I still have to bring up government because we still need sponsorship. Not to say they need to lead it, but I think a big part of it is throwing some form of money at certain things.
And they're the decision makers when it comes to government laws. It's them.
It sucks because we still have this culture of, if it's coming from foreign, then it's better. And we need to follow it there, even though it doesn't make any sense. And I know we can't stop them from actually doing that or thinking that way. But I think it needs to start with public sector sponsoring private sector to pretty much do what we need to do independently. So provide that funding and generic support, but then listening to us, because we keep talking about seat at the table with global AI, and
we don't even have one locally.
We're not in the conversation necessarily. But then is the conversation about actually doing good with emerging tech, or is it to get a photo shoot and a photo op to say that you're doing it. And that's something, the difference is very important. And I have been in situations where I have to speak to the regulators and defend certain decisions.
Yeah,
Right?
because that's form over function, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have to explain every single bit of why we did some stuff. Even if it's using an automated system, you still have to be able to justify why things were done because you're liable for everything. So it's not like your self-driving car goes on the road, it kills somebody. Yeah, you're still liable, in my opinion, even if the self-driving car just decided to hit somebody over. And these micro decisions that are being taken for granted, it should really be the same thing. So you need something to track it. It's hard to really tell them they need to do it and then they're gonna actually do it, right? I mean, you're gonna have to rebel and enforce and whatever it is. But I think private sector, we do have a responsibility, even if the government isn't supporting us, to actually let our clients understand and know what's going on. And I'll say something really important as well is we've expanded into the US because what would happen is we'd clean up a lot of issues. So we'd have a company come in that doesn't understand these tools, the garbage cause problems, and then they need somebody to come in because we're in an environment where data protection is an issue, data quality is a huge problem, people don't understand what's going on. We are actually very well equipped to expand out into other regions that are a little more established because we don't take things for granted. Pretty much like Nanny of the Maroons thing, you use what you have around you. You make the most of it, and you're probably actually better at solving these problems because you're in a unstructured and more informal environment than these people. Yeah.
So, Samantha, how do we come out of the dark, right? How do we get from a point of seeming illiteracy? I would say seeming illiteracy on several fronts, and by the people who we depend on to lead when it comes to these kinds of conversation, the policymakers, the decision makers, the stakeholders, the lawmakers, and the business sector, because we heavily depend on the business sector a lot, and they do hold a lot of sway and power in Jamaica. They do. So if all of us are illiterate, if them illiterate are we illiterate, are we look for them and them and look for we like what? How do we come out of that and get to a point where we can make rational decisions that are equitable for everyone, as you said, fair, ethical decisions around these things and regulations, etc.?
You know, it's very interesting. There's a level of self-deprecation that takes place across Jamaica that always interests me. Why always assume Jamaica is behind? Literacy, I mean, the fact that there's a Jamaican Twitter should already tell us that digital literacy is not that far. What I'm trying to say is, it's a society that is very well connected. If you ask the payment remittance industry, it's well known that Jamaica is very well connected, right? So I think the constant assumption that Jamaica is so far behind the rest of the world is one that has to be addressed, because what that leads to is a scarcity mentality, which then makes people feel like, Lord, we must catch up. And the only way to catch up is, boom, go and take somebody from foreign and go and do some stupidness, and bang, you have the situation that we spoke about last time.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm calling no names. But the point I'm making is this assumption of being behind is perhaps some of the problem, okay? Every government that I'm aware of have had to grapple with this same issue. And what we tend to find is that the private sector will always lead, because they will procure, and as they develop and procure and have that relationship, which is almost symbiotic, we will then start to see regulation, frameworks, etc. built around that. As to the issue around digital literacy, that can only start at the beginning of the academic experience and even before. And so, what does it mean to be in a digital society? Well, it means it means different things to different countries. But I, to date, have not come across a country who seemed to be very prepared for digital society. And COVID highlighted that.
Yeah.
What we saw in COVID was an opportunity to have a rapid acceleration into digitization, whether the people liked it or not, which led to many people being left behind.
Yeah.
So, on this one, I will say being behind the is actually the better position to be in, because that's the way that it's going to be a lot more fair for all the people. You mentioned earlier about bank branches being opened and then closed and replaced by technology. I can tell you there are large areas of the UK that are unserved by a post office, a bank, a doctor's surgery,
a government office.
Don't even start on government office. Government office is concentrated in very few areas.
Yeah.
That's it, right? So, this rapid acceleration, which actually was being talked about at the World Economic Forum in 2019, and the need to push forward into the digital society, which subsequently just happened in 2020. It's not necessarily a good thing. What we need to do is sit back. We need to watch and understand what the technology is, how it benefits the people of this country and each country, because the Caribbean is not a monolith either, right? And then from there, that's when, as people become conversant and make sure that, building systems to make sure that people are educated and their awareness is raised. But I see that happening in Jamaica, if I'm honest. I see an extensive awareness campaign that is similar to the campaigns I see everywhere else. And I'm talking about, I'm commonly in the US, and I'm commonly in France, I'm commonly in the UK. Like, I'm not seeing any difference. Yes, what seems to lag behind slightly is this is a standard within the country of what does the technology mean to you, and when you procure that technology, what checks and balances do you need to go through? Usually, you first see it in government and in heavily regulated industries, banking, healthcare, etc. They tend to lead on that, and then the rest of the private sector adopts it. But going back to our point earlier, I think it's just a real opportunity for the more nimble associations to come together and to architect frameworks that work for this country until we see something else coming out. But the conversation needs to be from those of us who are firstly expert and have been in this industry for a long time, and secondly have the ability to make decisions without too much bureaucracy.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. And you see, I like when I say things and then the experts come in and go, actually, right? So yes, I would definitely agree with Samantha that Jamaicans, the everyday Jamaicans, are more digitally literate than we were before. But I want to make a distinction between knowing how to use social media and digital literacy, because that's different, right? That's just one aspect of digital literacy. When we're talking about digital literacy, it's understanding how to use technology to improve our daily lives, whether it's our work or for personal development or for professional development. I think that's where we are a little bit, I think that's where we're behind based on my experiences and what I have seen. But I do agree with Samantha that the thought, and Mr. Cordell agrees with it, we are not necessarily behind. We're early adopters of technology. We are very, very much hype when it comes to 3 phone, and one is iPhone and Android and Apple, and We have devices. We have smart devices. We're not short of smart devices, but it's how we use those devices, and our knowledge as it relates to the use of devices for, as I said before, personal and professional development. I think we are behind there. But yeah, agree with you, Samantha. I agree with you, Adrian. I thank you guys so much for being a part of the show. We went overtime because this conversation could have 3, 4, 5 parts. Because guys, there's actually a lot happening, and it's happening really fast. And as Samantha says, all governments are grappling with this at the moment. I am peel-eyed to see how the government respond to these, how the judiciary responds to these lawsuits, because you know they're going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is a party shop in the US. But we are going to see if it falls on political lines, or what other lines it falls on when it comes to how they make a decision about how these technologies are using data, the rights that we have as users of the technologies and as consumers. Samantha talks about consumer protections, inequity, biases, and all these other things that come into play. I am peel-eyed to see how they respond to that, because a lot of the times how they respond colors how other governments elsewhere respond, how other judiciaries elsewhere respond. So that's a very interesting thing to watch happening. And I'm particularly excited about all of this because it's a new it's a new conversation to us, even though the conversation has been happening a long time, and where we are now coming to a lot of realizations because of COVID, as it relates to technology and uses of technology. Although I do have concerns, I'm actually really excited about this and where this goes. But yeah, really appreciate this conversation, Samantha. You always come with some very interesting perspective that I may not have thought about. So I really appreciate you for coming on. Adrian, also appreciate you for being on as somebody who's in the space, on the ground every day, in the gutters, as we call it, as it relates to building these things up, informing the private sector about what these things are and how these things are using. And as an entrepreneur in this space, really appreciate your thoughts. Really would be interested in that and an answer to that. Read the JTDA though, Adrian, but that's for another show. That's
We're actually working on a few things currently.
yeah. So let's have another conversation about this, specifically from the JTDA, because personally I think that the JTDA is underutilized in these conversations, and when it comes to these kinds of things, and I know Samantha agrees with me on that one. But guys, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It was an amazing conversation, a very thought-provoking conversation, as well. And there's so many different components and moving parts, and things are happening so fast, and the excitement around it all, and what are we going to do, and how are we going to regulate, and how are we going to make the technology work for us, and is robots going to take over, and all these conversations are really interesting, and they're really happening, but we need to contextualize it, and we need to make it make sense for us in the Caribbean, because a lot of the conversations that are happening have no relevance to you over here. So we need to make it relevant for us, and that's what I'm attempting to do with this AI series. So thanks Adrian for being here, really appreciate it, and thanks you guys. So next week we're going on a break because I need a break. Right now I'm not even feeling so well. I'm recovering from the flu, stuffy as hell, but here we are. So I'm taking a break next week, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about continuing our conversation about technology. We're going to talk about deep fake. And how this definitely needs to be something that we're concerned about, because if you guys saw that Jordan Peele deepfake video with Obama, and that they call it PSA with Obama, and people thinking that was real. And I even saw on TikTok the other day, there was a gentleman who was speaking at some UN conference about something having to do with oil, and how they used a deep fake to chop that up right? And make it so like the man is saying that they're working to kill off certain people in certain places. It was very interesting to me how people are using deep fake to spread misinformation, disinformation, to divide and to stir up trouble generally. And I really want us to talk about that. And that's what we're going to be coming back with. So this is pretty much the end of our AI series. And then after the break, we're coming back to talk about deep fake, which is a pretty interesting technology. So thank you guys so much. And I will see you guys not next week, not the week after that, but the week after that. Okay, guys, take care. Bye.